My daughter, Lily, was 7, and like most 7-year-olds, making new friends was the highlight of her existence. So when a new family, the Barstows, moved into the house at the end of our street, a grand old Victorian that had been beautifully renovated, Lily was ecstatic to learn they had a daughter her age, named Clara. I met Clara's mother, Elaine, at a school PTA meeting. She was elegant, if a little reserved, with an unnervingly still gaze. She dressed impeccably, always in muted, expensive-looking clothes. She agreed to a playdate, suggesting our house first, as they were still settling in. The first playdate went fine. Clara was a quiet child, very pale, with large, dark eyes that seemed to absorb everything. She didn't say much, mostly just watched Lily play, a small, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. She had a strange doll with her, an old-fashioned porcelain thing with vacant, painted-on eyes and a stitched smile. She never let it out of her sight. The following week, it was our turn to go to their house. The Victorian was even more impressive on the inside. Dark wood, high ceilings, antique furniture. It felt less like a family home and more like a museum. Elaine offered me tea in a delicate china cup while the girls went off to play in Clara's room. Mr. Barstow, Elaine explained, was away on business, a phrase that seemed to be a permanent state for him. I sat in the formal living room making polite small talk with Elaine. She had a way of answering questions without really revealing anything about herself. After about an hour, I started to feel a bit restless. The house was eerily quiet, apart from the faint sounds of the girls giggling upstairs. Then, a thud, a heavy one, from upstairs. The giggling stopped. "Girls," Elaine called, her voice calm, but her eyes flickered for a moment. No response. "I'll just check on them," she said, rising smoothly. I followed, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. We found them in Clara's room. It was an enormous room, filled with antique toys and dolls, all meticulously arranged. Lily was sitting on the floor, her back to us, perfectly still. Clara was standing beside her, that porcelain doll clutched in her hands, staring at Lily with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "Lily, honey, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Lily didn't turn. Clara slowly looked up at us, her dark eyes wide. "Lily doesn't want to play anymore," she said, her voice a flat monotone. "Lily?" I moved towards her. That's when I saw it. A thin trickle of blood was running from Lily's nose. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, staring straight ahead. "What happened?" I demanded, kneeling beside my daughter. Elaine put a calming hand on my arm. "Children fall, dear. I'm sure it's nothing." But her eyes, those still, dark eyes, were fixed on Clara and that doll. Lily started to cry then, soft, hiccuping sobs. Clara said, the doll told her I was bad," she whimpered. "She pushed me." I looked at Clara. Her expression hadn't changed. "The doll doesn't like it when children are bad," she stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. I scooped Lily up. "We're leaving," I told Elaine, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. Elaine just nodded, a faint, almost sad smile on her face. "Of course, perhaps another time." As I hurried Lily out of that house, I glanced back. Clara was still standing in her room, the doll held tightly, her dark eyes following us. And for a fleeting second, I could have sworn the doll's head turned, its painted eyes glinting in the dim light. Lily had a nasty bruise on her forehead where she'd hit the floor, and her nose bled intermittently for the rest of the day. She refused to talk about what happened in Clara's room beyond what she'd already said. She never asked to play with Clara again. A few weeks later, I saw Elaine at the grocery store. She looked different. Her expensive clothes were slightly rumpled, her hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She avoided my gaze. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Mr. Barstow had returned from business and that things were tense at the Barstow house. There were rumors of shouting, of things being broken. Then, one morning, the Barstow house was quiet. Too quiet. Police cars lined the street. Crime scene tape was stretched across their pristine lawn. The news trickled out in hushed whispers. Mr. Barstow was dead. Not an accident. The police were calling it a homicide. Elaine was taken in for questioning, but later released. Clara was placed with relatives. The cause of death was never officially released to the public, but the rumors were horrific. They said he was found in Clara's room, surrounded by those antique dolls, his eyes wide with terror, and dozens of small, almost surgical puncture marks all over his body. The kind of marks, some whispered, that the sharp, pointed hands of a porcelain doll might make if it were animated. The Barstow house is for sale again. No one in the neighborhood talks about what happened there, not really. But Lily, she still has nightmares. Sometimes she wakes up screaming, talking about a doll with black, empty eyes that whispers terrible things. And I can't help but wonder what really went on in that grand old Victorian, and if that porcelain doll is still out there, clutched in the hands of a quiet, pale little girl. We were all pretty excited when the sold sign finally went up on the old Henderson place across the street. It had been empty for nearly a year after Mrs. Henderson passed, and the neighborhood was starting to feel a bit like a ghost town on our block. My name's Mark, by the way, and I was 28 at the time, living in a comfortable, if a bit boring, suburban cul-de-sac. The new family, the Whitmans, seemed nice enough from a distance. A couple, probably in their late 30s, no kids that we could see. They moved in on a Saturday, and like any good neighbor, I kept an eye out, ready to offer a welcoming wave or a hand with a heavy box. They were private. They unloaded most of their stuff themselves, and when they did emerge, it was with quick, almost furtive movements. It was a few days later that I first saw their dog. I was watering my lawn, enjoying the late afternoon sun, when Mr. Whitman came out to get his mail. Trotting beside him on a thick leather leash was the most peculiar creature I'd ever laid eyes on. It was about the size of a German shepherd, but its proportions were all wrong. Its legs seemed too long and spindly for its thick, barrel-chested body. Its fur was a matted, dull gray, and it moved with an odd, almost insect-like gait, its joints bending at unnatural angles. But the head, that was the worst part. It was too small for its body, almost reptilian, with wide-set, pupilless black eyes that seemed to absorb the light. It didn't bark. It made a low, guttural clicking sound, a chattering that sent a prickle of unease down my neck. "New dog," I called over, trying to sound casual. Mr. Whitman flinched, as if startled by my voice. He gave a tight, forced smile. "Ah, yes. Rescued him. A bit unusual, but very loyal." He tugged the leash, and the creature, he called it Creeper of all things, followed him back inside without a sound, save for that soft, chattering click. Over the next few weeks, Creeper became the subject of much neighborhood speculation. No one had ever seen a dog like it. Kids were terrified of it. Other dogs would bark and whine incessantly whenever it was walked, which was always late at night or very early in the morning, always on that thick leash, and always with Mr. or Mrs. Whitman looking around nervously. One evening, my own dog, a golden retriever named Buddy, started acting strangely. He was usually a calm, happy-go-lucky animal, but he began to pace by the front window, whining and letting out low growls, his hackles raised. He'd stare intently at the Whitman house, refusing to be coaxed away. Then the disappearances started. First, it was small animals. Mrs. Gable's cat, Mittens, vanished. Then O'Malley's prize-winning rabbit. People chalked it up to coyotes, which weren't unheard of in our area, despite the suburban setting. But I couldn't shake the image of Creeper, with those dead black eyes and that unnatural gait. The tension in the neighborhood grew. The Whitmans became even more reclusive. Lights in their house were often off, even in the evening, and a strange, musky odor sometimes wafted from their property, especially after a rain. One night, I was woken by a frantic barking from Buddy. I leapt out of bed and ran to the window. In the moonlight, I saw it. Creeper was in my yard. It wasn't on a leash. It was larger than I remembered, its spindly legs carrying its bulky torso with horrifying speed. It was sniffing around Buddy's doghouse. Buddy was going insane, barking and lunging at the window. Creeper turned its too small head, its black eyes fixing on my window. It didn't react to Buddy's barking. It just stared. Then it let out a sound that was definitely not a click. It was a high-pitched, almost human-like scream, short and sharp, that cut through the night. Before I could even process what to do, it bounded over my fence, a 6-foot privacy fence, with an agility that defied its clumsy appearance, and disappeared into the darkness. I called the police. I told them about the strange animal, the missing pets, the scream. They came, took a report, shone flashlights around, but of course, found nothing. They probably thought I was crazy. The next morning, the Whitman house was empty. No moving truck, no goodbyes. Just gone. As if they'd vanished into thin air. The only thing left behind was that thick leather leash lying discarded on their front porch. The police investigated further, especially after more reports of missing pets surfaced from other neighborhoods bordering the woods behind our cul-de-sac. They found strange tracks, too large for a coyote, too unsettling. And in the Whitmans' basement, they found remains. Not human, thank God, but dozens of small animal bones picked clean, arranged in strange, almost ritualistic patterns. No one ever saw the Whitmans or Creeper again. The Henderson place is empty once more. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind rustles the trees just right, I think I can hear that soft, chattering click. And Buddy, well, Buddy still won't go near that house. He just whines and stares, as if he knows something truly monstrous once lived just across the street. It was one of those oppressively hot July nights, the kind where the air itself feels thick and heavy, like a wet blanket. I was 16, and my parents had gone out for the evening, a rare anniversary dinner. That left me in charge of our sprawling, slightly too large suburban house, a duty I usually relished, free reign of the fridge, the TV, the good couch. But tonight, something felt off. Our backyard was our pride and joy, or rather, my dad's. Meticulously kept lawn, a small vegetable patch, and a high wooden privacy fence that bordered the Petersons' property. The Petersons were an elderly couple, quiet and rarely seen. Their side of the fence was, to put it mildly, a jungle. Overgrown vines, untamed bushes, and a general air of neglect that contrasted sharply with our own manicured space. Around 10 p.m., I was in the living room, half watching some mindless action movie, the windows open to catch any hint of a breeze. That's when I first heard it. A faint, rhythmic scratching sound. I muted the TV. It seemed to be coming from the backyard. Curiosity and a touch of teenage bravado got the better of me. I grabbed the heavy mag light from the kitchen drawer and stepped out onto the patio. The scratching continued, more distinct now. It was definitely coming from the fence line, near the back where the Petersons' wild growth was thickest. Probably just a raccoon, I muttered, trying to reassure myself. I shone the mag light towards the sound. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the familiar wooden slats of our fence. Nothing. The scratching stopped the moment the light hit the area. "Hello," I called out, feeling a bit foolish. No response, just the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of cicadas. I shrugged, figuring whatever animal it was had been scared off. I went back inside, locked the patio door, something I rarely did, and tried to get back into my movie. But the unease lingered. About 20 minutes later, the scratching started again. This time it was accompanied by something else, a low, almost inaudible whisper. I couldn't make out any words, just a soft, sibilant hissing, like air escaping slowly from a tire, interwoven with the scratching. My heart began to thump a little faster. This wasn't a raccoon. I crept to the back window, peering through the blinds. The backyard was bathed in the pale glow of the security light, but the far end of the fence, where the sound originated, was deep in shadow. The whispering was clearer now, though still unintelligible. It sounded like multiple voices, very low, very close together. A shiver traced its way down my spine. I told myself it was the Petersons. Maybe they were out in their yard, tending to something, though why they'd be doing it in the dark, whispering and scratching at the fence, was beyond me. But the alternative, that it was someone else, someone unknown, was far more unsettling. I stayed by the window for what felt like an eternity, the maglite clutched in my sweaty hand. The scratching and whispering continued, an eerie, unnerving symphony. Then I saw movement. A pale shape, low to the ground, flitted along the base of the fence on their side, just at the edge of the shadows. It was too quick to identify. A cat? A possum? It didn't quite look like either. The whispering intensified for a moment, then abruptly ceased. The scratching stopped too. Silence descended, heavier than before. I waited, my breath held, but the sounds didn't return. I spent the rest of the night jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. I double-checked all the locks, drew all the curtains. Sleep was impossible. When my parents finally came home around 1 a.m., the relief that washed over me was immense. I didn't tell them what happened. I figured they'd dismiss it as an overactive imagination. The next morning, in the bright, unforgiving sunlight, I went out to inspect the fence. On our side, everything looked normal. But I noticed something odd. A small, almost perfectly circular hole, about the size of a quarter, had been bored into one of the wooden slats, right where I'd heard the scratching. It hadn't been there before. I peered through it. All I could see was a dense tangle of the Petersons' overgrown foliage. The hole itself wasn't what scared me. It was what was around it. The wood was splintered outwards towards our yard, as if whatever made the hole had done so from the other side. And etched into the wood, almost invisible unless you were looking for them, were tiny, spidery symbols I didn't recognize. They looked almost like writing, but no language I'd ever seen. I never heard the scratching or the whispering again. The Petersons moved out a few months later. Their house sold to a young family who promptly cleared out the jungle in their backyard. But sometimes when I'm home alone and the night is too quiet, I find myself glancing towards that fence, half expecting to hear those soft, sibilant whispers, wondering what or who was on the other side and what they wanted. The hole is still there, a tiny dark eye staring into our yard. I've never had the courage to plug it.